Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. Okay, I'm admitting everyone. We have one more, and that's the 20th person, and that's the 21st person. I'm quite happy to see so many people joining our first resumed breakfast of the autumn session. So it's been, what, about 2 months for our summer break?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We stopped in June and decided we'll not be doing anything until September. So glad to see everyone rejoining us.
All right. So what are we going to talk about today, Raivis?
Yeah, when me and Sergey, we thought of how do we restart because we have to restart. We think everybody's restarting right now. Then our initial idea was to start with some more general overview, what has happened, what kind of lessons we learned, our clients learned, and go from there, look into the future and plan for the future, knowing what has just happened in the last couple of months.
So I thought we would start by first sharing probably our own experiences at INTEA, and I think the a little bit unscheduled learning lesson from about restarting is that restarting is never easy. We were supposed to have this meeting in office. Now, for technical reasons, we ended up in two different locations with Raivis, so we'll be joining this virtually, so I can't kick him under the table when he goes overtime, or vice versa, as it usually happens. So yes, let's think about what we've learned and uncovered. So Raivis, what have you learned in those 3 months? Have it been maybe easier than you expected, or maybe it's the way that you actually prefer things to go? Because well, I know we're not running a hotel here or a restaurant or an airline, so we are kind of on the easier side of things.
Yes, of course, we are on the easier side of things, and perhaps our business was hit in the first 2 months of the pandemic, and then we recovered. And on average, I would say that we are doing really well. But operationally, there were a couple of big lessons learned. One was that we discovered that at least our team, we are totally capable of working remotely, and no processes, nothing was disrupted. But at the same time, we also found that when it comes to creative things, to coming up with concepts and discussing design, coming up with storyboards, and thinking creatively, Zoom or Teams is not the best way to do it. And still, meeting in the office and working in the office has its benefits. So it's kind of it's an experience that is different in a way. So in some ways, people are happier. We see how our employees react to their engagement surveys, that generally they're more happy because I think they're more flexible in how they can plan their time and work. But there are certain areas where we saw that it's not that easy to do that. And at some point, of course, you get bored with Zoom calls and things like that. So yeah, it's a very different world and different findings.
Yeah, I would say that where I found kind of the key to success was in communicating, and I think that we've spent a couple of previous years really putting communication first and like front and center at INTEA. So. But by communicating, I don't mean by just having a coffee or just talking to each other and so on. Communication is basically information sharing as well, right? So it's in part being organized. It's in part knowing where everything is. It's in part like the best communication is when you probably don't have to communicate, is when you don't have to ask, you just know, you've been told before, you have agreed before, and so on, and everyone is on the same frequency and everyone speaks the same language, if we want to use my metaphor from this background of this slide. At INTEA, it's been a mess a few years back when we grew rapidly, but since then we've kind of got things in order, and I see this with INTEA clients as well. So clients who had a chance, or the willingness to establish a proper communication before, didn't suffer from switching to remote at all, right? When your work is organized in a ways that everyone gathers around the boss's table and suggests idea, and then he points a finger and picks up, and everyone asks each other what's going on. You have to have those in-person meetings all the time, otherwise things don't get done. When you can't have those meetings, things don't get done. That's easy. So I think that if we talk about being prepared, it's looking at your communication and trying to assess how many times per day do you have to email someone and ask them about something? How many times? Because when they move out of office again, they might not be able to answer you straight away. There will be distracting factors. I have my distracting factor just went to second grade, for example. I know Raivis has a couple of those, and we won't be able to communicate as effectively. So the goal, I think, is to decrease the amount of noisy communication, the questions that don't need to be asked, things that can be set in writing prior on one Zoom call, instead of saying, okay, we'll figure this out on the next call and the next call, and let's talk tomorrow again, and so on. So that's no communication is the best communication. You have to be prepared for that. So right now you have to start measuring or gauging how much of this noisy communication happens in your office, and get rid of that before it becomes an obstacle. We were lucky that we've done that, and I think that worked in our favor. So
yeah, but if we talk about, I think that what's also important to mention, if we talk about the learning and development function and how communication works there, then remember those breakfasts we had about marketing.
Yes.
And the part of that, of course, was how do you communicate your product, right? How do you promote it? So what I've seen in the last couple of months working with clients in different countries and industries, that for some of them, actually, remote work came with a huge decrease in training attendance, in satisfaction with training, and so on, partly because they had no other means to communicate training than, for example, one email that came when something happens, or only when your manager comes and tells you have to take this course. So those learning and development teams and departments that had that communication tool set very, very small, then they suffered the most. But those that had already established, learning management systems with good communication tools, or those who use a lot of marketing tricks in promoting their learning, they actually have not suffered that much. So that also, what I'm thinking is that it's not only peer-to-peer communication we have to take into account here, but also how do we prepare our communication strategy for the learning department. Because there you don't have, your number of your channels has decreased when you moved out of the office. So you cannot meet people in the lift, in the elevator, and tell them, have you taken this course? You cannot do that. So you have to think creatively, how will you push it in a situation where everything is online? Everything went online, so there's even more competition with everything else.
Okay, so one other thing I think we want to move to, a very much connected lesson here is organization, right? So
yes.
Again, internally at INTEA, we've invested enormous amounts of time into being organized, and that really paid off right now. So I don't think our operations suffered in the least, right? So we've never had this, or we used to have, like many years ago, this problem where you have to like constantly remind people about something, and that's noisy communication again, where you have to ask people about how something is done, where it's located, has someone sent a script for your course, has a vendor sent their files by now, or when it's going to happen. So everything right works like a factory on a conveyor belt here. So that's paid off in
And
great amount.
also here, yeah, I would mention that when it comes to developing training or e-learning, say any kind of project management, our previous era at INTEA was that everything revolved around the project manager. And the idea was that if you have to produce an e-learning course, the project manager and the project team have to be present in one office. Yeah, because there's constantly exchange of ideas, you have to control things, you have to put things together so that different projects do not overlap. So it was very intense in terms of project management. So what happened and what we chose as our strategy at some point 3-4 years ago, that we want the teams to take the lead. We want the people to take the lead for the project. So it's not that the project manager has to remind you something or has to control you, but actually you have to be in control of your work. You have to know when you receive something, what you have to do, when you have to deliver it. And the project manager is there to give you information and support. And that actually worked really well in the remote setup, because people with those kind of skills do not need all those, update calls every day or every week. So basically, a lot of our communication that previously was in a meeting room did not go directly into the Zoom calls, but went into chat, which is much less noisy, which is much less synchronous. And that helped a lot to reduce that waste. And if I have to measure how much time a person had to spend in the meetings before COVID and during the pandemic, actually that decreased.
Yeah, let me especially give a thumbs up to the design team, which is now the creative department. We've on a side note, one of the things that probably changed us during this pandemic, we understood some functions a little bit better, also by isolating them. And one of the things that happened is that we now have a creative department, which previously used to be two things. One was for script writing and content creation. The other was for illustrations and visual design and media production. So now it's one department. And those guys really surprised us, the management, in how we thought that creatives would need to have that conversation every day. They need to point fingers, they need to look at each other's screen and so on, and they need to be managed because they want to be creative. They don't want to work with schedules and reports and stuff like that. And they positively surprised us by probably staying the most organized department of all. And when everyone moved home, and they, instead of requiring more management, they just required less management. Everyone became more self-organized, and I hope they keep that up when we move back to the office. But that was a positive surprise. So if you have it's interesting that some professions like accountants in the company or lawyers might be the least organized of all, and creatives are people that you generally would assume require more external management because they just not interested in managerial things, actually aren't. And or maybe we're just lucky with the team that we
have. Moving on to the next topic. Pause and think.
Yes, that's I think that what happened to many industries, from school education to businesses to specifically L&D function inside businesses, was that everything happened a little bit too quickly. So we had to adapt and improvise on the fly. The benefit of that, of course, is that no one can really throw stones at us, the L&D people, and say that yeah, that was bad and that was bad and that didn't work quite well, because well, we did what we could in the time that we had. Now, I think if we plan for 2021, it's going to be different. Our management will definitely, or in case of INTEA, our clients will definitely not let us slide when it comes to being prepared or having a plan. So it's important now, and at this short period of time when everyone is coming back to the office, but not everyone is still super engaged into day-to-day tasks, and while people are generally happy from the summer and so on, if they are, grab them, put them in the same room, keep them 2 meters apart though, and try to get this common frequency and common communication, common organization going. So you have this time right now to pause and not start doing things immediately. If you need to build 100 courses before New Year, if you need to install a new LMS before New Year and so on, still take a little bit of time and pause and think and get people into the same room and think together, and get as many people on the same page as you can. Evaluate what has been done, who has been a problem for you in the past years, get them and get them ready. So I think we are in a very short amount of time where we can still do that quite easily organizationally, and it's important to do that before we jump into producing a lot of content. For example, I know there are companies who say that okay, we have changed the anything that's face-to-face to online, and we need to build all of that and so on, but it won't just work by converting it. It's a general, more kind of organizational issue, in company-wide issue, and get people into the same room, ask them to review, kind of do the same thing that we're doing right now with you, with your stakeholders, be it the department heads or your C-level management or someone else. So,
and what I found during this 5-6 months, talking to different customers, because what my goal was to really figure out, so what's the recipe? Yeah, so clearly pandemic is not going away. Pandemic may be going away, but the COVID is not going away, and so we have to be prepared, second wave or not. So I was trying to talk to different companies and asking them, so what are you doing and how does that work? And the surprise was that I would hear some of the opinions that would be, absolutely opposite, where some companies said, we moved to Zoom, we're doing a lot of training in Zoom and it's working okay, yeah, at least not worse than before. And some companies were saying it's a disaster, right? Same goes for, interactive trainings and a lot of other things that basically show that there is no silver bullet here again. And as Sergey is saying, the only way to be successful and the only way to develop learning and development further is not to second guess things, but really to go and try to do that evidence-based. Yeah. And those customers, again, we have that are doing very good, kind of they are good at evaluating learning results and learning outcomes and comparing, different formats, different outcomes, different approaches. Those, of course, are in a better position now to say, for example, that we will not be doing Zoom trainings like we used to do, where, for example, if you had 1 hour face-to-face training, now you have 1 hour in Zoom. No, we found that that has to be condensed into 20 minutes, for example, and then we'll blend it with some other activities So those customers are more likely. But if you do not have data, or if, for example, you haven't done a lot of training during this last 6 months to really analyze, right? Still try and find ways to talk to the people, to gather data, and base your plan on solid grounds, because there's no silver bullet.
Yes, that's true. So when we talk about pausing and thinking, one of the things is to think about is actually how are you going to measure your learning success if you are not doing that or are not doing that consistently and so on, because we've had a whole breakfast devoted to understanding what works and what doesn't. But and if you're interested in the recording or anything, just let us know. But yes, it's important not to assume. And it's been interesting. In the beginning of summer, I had a few workshops scheduled outside of Latvia where I couldn't travel. The country I had to go to was closed for incoming tourists. Well, not tourists, but anyone pretty much, unless you have a citizenship and so on. So I had to kind of think, how do I convert a 2-day workshop into an online program? How do I convert a 1-day workshop to an online program? And I've tried different things. For example, I've tried, for one group, I've tried splitting up a longer program into 2 hours every day. And that wasn't a huge success, because it turns out that the energy you need to get people into the same Zoom room and into the same thing is just too high, and you have to do that 3 times in a week, and then you have to do it for the sake of just 2 hours, and people think, well, it's 2 hours. If I skip 2 hours, nothing bad is going to happen, and so on. Whereas when I said, okay, the next workshop is going to be 8 hours online, to be prepared. We start at 9 o'clock, and then we'll end the meeting at 5 or 5:30, and there will be a lunch break, coffee break, and kind of like face things. Then it actually worked better, because it turns out that it's easier. So it actually worked better. It turns out that it's easier for people to devote a whole day to something and tell their manager that they're off for a training than to find 2 hours every day. Whereas I thought otherwise. So I learned this by experience. So I went out and found out how that works. You can probably not experiment, especially on large amounts of people, and instead just ask them, try to gauge them, and build in metrics into how you will evaluate what works and what doesn't, if you want to run an experiment. So instead of, can we just ask people? Can we do it in a organized manner? Can we measure their engagement by doing polls and so on and so on? Speaking of doing polls, how do you feel right now? So type a plus in the chat if you're still with us. If you're on camera, don't hesitate to be on camera, wave at us, and we'll just check that you're here.
Yeah, we have some pluses.
Okay, some people are. That's useful. Excellent. All right, so now I want to jump to 2 practical cases. I'll kick off with DNV Gale, and then I'll hand over it to Raivis. Why? Because DNV is the project that I actually participated in, sort of on the ground, doing the technical work and so on. So DNV, for those of you who don't know, is this, it's that Norske Veritas / Germanic Lloyd. So it's a huge company that does certification and risk management, and a lot of this legal and technical stuff in the oil and gas and shipping fields. And
we actually have Svenja, our
right.
Excellent. From the NVGL here. And why we wanted to mention this case is actually, it was a little bit of a coincidence, but there is something we learned from this case that we wanted to share. So long story short, the idea was that we need to decrease the face-to-face training time in 2 ways. first is really the theoretical side of one of their learning programs that before that would take days and days of explaining things, and that would happen either face to face and maybe online with some slides, and it was clear it's not working, right? So it would take a lot of effort from the learners, from the trainers, and with a lot of commute involved, because some of the people have to travel from the opposite sides of the world. So that was one side of it, and the other side of that was that it's also a training program for surveyors that is very, very practical. So basically, when they would take this training, they would have to know the theory, if we can, use that simple word for it. And they then had to have a face-to-face experience with their mentors, tutors, really watching how the tutors work, right? And learn the real things you have to do on site when you're certifying a container. And then finally, you had to prove that you are capable of doing it. And clearly you cannot make this program online only, or I would say, no, rather I would use the word asynchronous, right? You cannot make it so that the person does it all without participation of a mentor. But we tried to experiment, and we wanted to decrease that face-to-face time to a minimum, and definitely not lose, but improve the learner experience. And from that project, we actually learned one thing, that if you're teaching somebody a very technical skill, right, like they have to be able to observe something or do something, and they have to know the real environment of it, that you can use, for example, a 360 degree videos to show it. So basically, instead of sending a person to a factory, I don't know, from Mexico to Poland, you can produce a 360 video of the process there on site, and then people can use it, and they don't have to travel. And basically, if you do it interactively, and if you compile all of the expert knowledge in it and demonstrate it in that way, then you can decrease that time they need to do face-to-face with their mentors. So basically, from a program where first you would listen to a lecture, then you would meet your mentor and shadow him or her, and then you would have to demonstrate your knowledge, right, from these three big parts. We were able to put online and put into an asynchronous mode these first two parts. So basically the theory and getting to know the things, getting this visual representation was put online. Yeah. And that mentioned.
Just a technical note here. When we say 360 videos or 360 tours, some people assume immediately that it has something to do with VR, that you would need goggles and just disengage and say, okay, well, that's not for us. No, if you've ever experienced Google Street View, where you on Google Maps you can just drop a little person into a street and then just walk around by clicking here and there, and you move along the street until you find the house that you need, and you can take a look at what it looks like and so on. This is exactly what we've built, but custom built for a customer. So it's you're walking inside a closed off territory, inside a factory. You can approach the containers that you need to inspect. You can walk around those containers. You can click different parts. You can look at different details of those containers, either in a demo mode where you just walk around and learn about it, or in a test mode where you walk around and you have to actually decide something, whether it fits or not, whether the markings are correct or not, and so on. So it's on the delivery side, it's not very technically difficult for the learners. It works on mobile and computers. You don't need any goggles or anything. But in terms of putting the learner into the shoes of someone who's actually working in a factory at the times where they can't walk, and we started this in November, so before everything. And
Yeah,
then,
and and the idea here is not to promote. I would say that the thing is, we are not here promoting the exact approach, the 360 video, at least not myself, but rather that encourage you to be creative and to really think of ways how to use sometimes not that complicated technology, because this technology might sound very complicated. It's actually not that complicated. Virtual reality, artificial reality, all those things, they are very, very complex. It's very complex to produce. Not so many companies can afford it. Here, we were using something that is not that big and difficult. And the lesson learned for us was not to use 360 videos, but the lesson learned for us was rather try and think creatively, because, and this project started before COVID actually, but the COVID situation taught us that you have to change your ways anyway. You have to look for new technologies, new approaches, and you have to kind of forget this legacy or try to question the legacy of if you want to show something, then you have to show it face to face, or in Zoom.
I would say that it's an interesting challenge. So if you think that there is some type of learning that definitely cannot be taught online, or it does require face to face, or it does require travel, or you actually need to touch and hold and push and interact with things and so on, let us know, and we'll think together. I think what we've learned from that is that things that seem complex to move to an online environment might turn out easy, and sometimes vice versa, but it takes a little bit of creativity and courage to actually do that. So DNVGL, with that project, they made everything just in time before everything hit, and
that was a very lucky coincidence for all of us. Absolutely.
Now, we will also want to talk about one of our largest clients who do a lot of smaller projects, I would say. So they are like very much day-to-day clients. So INTEA, in a way, or part of INTEA is in a way extension of their learning function. And we work just, sometimes as their employee.
And it's a very good example of maybe a little bit of an opposite situation. So basically, if at DNVGL we had a big, huge project, basically with a lot of content, but that's one project, one topic, one learning program. As Sergey said, with Fresenius, we worked day to day for the last 7-8 years, and our lesson from COVID situation was a little bit different. It was more not so much about creativity maybe, but actually operational. So we've been talking to many customers in the past that if you really want to scale up your e-learning production, you have to come up with an e-learning strategy and guidelines and rules. You really have to set it up, so that then you can scale it up. Otherwise, it will be let's call it artisanage. Every time you do it, and every project will be different, and it will be very, very costly. And if you plan to produce hundreds of e-learnings, this is not the way to go. So during this COVID situation, what happened is that, of course, as everyone else, these companies also experienced that a lot of things had to be put online, and our cooperation actually increased. And what we learned here is that building that e-learning factory is a very good idea because that was so easy to scale it up. During the last 7 to 8 years, our colleagues, what they did, they were creating a knowledge base. With every new project, every new situation, they were creating, let's call it a manual, or actually it's a knowledge base, basically. I think now it's already close to 100 pages long manuals on how you do stuff. you know, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And when this client came to us, I think that was somewhere April or May, we started some of the big productions. That was very easy for our team to do more in the same amount of time. And that learned, that kind of, what is it? We did not learn that at that point. We already knew that, but that actually supported our vision that if you are to go onto this e-learning path and you plan that this will be a strategic direction in your company and you'll be producing a lot of e-learnings one way or another, then the good idea is to start building that rule book or strategy or manual, whatever you call it, so that even if you have to, whenever you have to attract an internal expert, whenever you have to attract a vendor, whenever you have to attract some colleagues or add new person to your learning and development team, the rules are there and they are written. That allows to decrease the number of mistakes, of course, and allows to produce so much more in the same amount of time, right?
I would say, yeah. So what I see very often, and I'm always annoyed by that situation with customers, when every new e-learning project is done by a new vendor, which is obviously, as we are one of those vendors, we would be annoyed. But from the company side, from the actual learning organization side, sometimes e-learning is thought of as this very creative industry where every project is a piece of art and you have to find the best company to do that, and this project has to be done in this way and that project has to be done into that in a different way, and that people have to be entertained all the time. And you know, if this course looks like the previous course, they will not be entertained. It's like you know, buying your kids books, and you know, we've already have a books on dinosaurs, and now we need a book on Marvel heroes and so on. So a lot of companies do that, and outside of, you know, just being too costly and, you know, taking too long to produce and so on, what happens is that they don't build up this knowledge base of how things are done, of the best practices and so on. And when everything needs to be scaled up, it's very hard. So if you are doing that in any part of your production, try and think about it twice now, and try to eliminate those custom things. Try and think of your courses as those stormtroopers marching, and they do look alike, but they are effective because you can churn out huge numbers of those instead of trying to raise a new Jedi of a course every time. That takes, you know, luck and skill and talent, lots of time and money. And
Absolutely. And I think that although sometimes for some, you know, specific situations, these super creative courses are needed because, you know, those courses deal with mindset, behavior, attitude, like a course on core values or customer service. They have to be, you know, blockbusters. But the trainings that are totally, I don't know, compliance or some very clear knowledge transfer courses where you do not expect some change in mindset, or they are not about improving skills, those can look alike, those can be very similar. And your learners, what they will appreciate, if you remember again our marketing breakfast, then remember the currency they pay for your courses is time. So for those simple things or those, you know, compliance things, what they are really interested in, at least in my experience, is to pay less, to spend less time. And as soon as you start building all those blows and whistles around your course, they tend to get longer, they tend to get more complex to navigate and to use. So, and learners are not happy to pay for it. So you have to be really smart. Where do you produce a blockbuster, Avatar kind of thing,
Yeah.
and where you are producing another sitcom with
Yeah, well,
very low production costs. So
Raivis, you're actually absolutely correct. So what I was thinking, is that look what happened to Hollywood. Hollywood stopped pretty much, right? So
yeah,
the first movie I think came out just right now in the end of August. That's Christopher Nolan's Tenet. But no movies. But TV series did not suffer that much, and YouTube shows have thrived. So when
absolutely.
you're planning for the future, think of your learning not as a stream of blockbuster movies, but rather of a TV series or maybe even a YouTube show. Not in the form. I'm not asking you to get in front of a camera, but in terms of time spent producing and the ability to scale up when needed. All right, so speaking of planning and thinking about the future, there are a few things that I wanted to touch upon. And the first thing is actually what we're using right now. It's Zoom. What we have found, and as an industry, I would say, and this is what a lot of vendors are talking about, and this is what a lot of companies are now trying to solve, whether by building new software or offering consultancy around it and so on, is that, and probably you've learned this hard way. Again, let us know in the chat if you've learned that doing the same face-to-face training but over Zoom does not work, just as well. And yes, you might still have the same trainer who uses the same slides, but it's not that, right? And we've tried to decipher, and a lot of companies have tried to decipher what's not that. And of course, the engagement is lower. The charisma, if your trainer has relied on charisma or strict looks at people in the audience to pay attention and so on, now it doesn't work. You can't look at people in the audience. You have to keep them engaged. It turns out that a lot of things that trainer was doing in the real life, like drawing on boards, do not transfer very nicely to Zoom unless they actually try and train that. A lot of things like putting people into different break rooms to have little groups, well, while it's possible in Zoom, technically doesn't work that much. So a lot of companies are now trying to find ways how to solve it. One of the huge problems, actually, that's really hard to solve is that if I gave you a link right now, right? Well, here's a YouTube video. It's maybe 60 seconds. Go and watch it. Then maybe 50% of you would return, because you would switch from listening to me to listening to something else, and then you would need a second to check on your email, and then something else, and then you would be gone. So if your training was based around getting people into different rooms and using different materials and then getting them back or collaborating, that's a problem. So there is it's a huge topic in itself, how to convert like face-to-face to online. But if you're planning, just don't plan for like, yeah, we'll just do it over Skype, or we'll just get everyone on Zoom and we'll use the same thing. Chances are it won't work, and it can fail in the range of anywhere between catastrophically to just not being as good. And you have to transfer, especially the activities, because talking head is a talking head. It kind of works most of the time, unless your trainer is really not relying on words but on something else to attract attention to themselves. But any activity, anything interactive that you want to do will probably need to be converted to a different form. And if you need people to put stickers on posters and do some sort of teamwork and collaboration, that won't work. You have to come up with something else. And then there is a question of how do you do that? And sometimes I've seen people who are trying to devise because my colleagues, the coaches who really train different things, some of them really struggled because they try to replicate the physical actions that they are doing in the training room into Zoom, and that's just technically complex, doesn't work that much, and but instead what I found out is that there are two principles on which you can convert Zoom to rather face-to-face to online training to Zoom in particular. Is one, you can convert on learning value. So you come, if you're a good trainer, then every activity that you do has a learning outcome. It's been designed to have a certain learning outcome. So you take that learning outcome, you keep that, and then you redesign the Zoom activity so that it achieves the same learning outcome, but you start from scratch. It doesn't have to be anything like what you used before in the room. That's one. Two is actually emotional value conversion. So it's either equal in learning value or equal in emotional value. Sometimes your activities are designed to provoke certain emotion, like warm-ups. You don't learn anything with icebreakers, but you break some ice, right? So if you don't try to do the same icebreaker as you were doing in the room, where everyone stands up and tells like 3 funny things about themselves, and one of them is not true, and so on, might not work just as well in a Zoom meeting, because people will drift away much faster than in a physical room. And I've tried that, and I experienced myself. So if you're looking for the same emotional value, let's say we need to break the ice, come up with something else. And you can tell everyone to take a piece of paper, write something on it, like their name, or where the city where they were born, or something else, fully non-offensive, and then show at the same time in a video, and then everyone does it simultaneously and looks at it and reads it. You can't do that easily in a physical room. You can easily do that on Zoom. The emotional value pretty much the same. You actually made people do something and obey your command, and this is, as a coach, what you're trying to achieve and get them into a habit for the day. And that's it. So it's an entirely different thing. You would never do that in real life, because then people would start turning around. They can see that very well, and they don't have anything to write with, and there is a problem every time. But again, so don't convert on what you're actually doing. Let's try and replicate this as much as closer. Either convert on learning value or convert on emotional value. Two other things from what I wanted to say when we talk about planning is that we found out that two areas have, well, if not skyrocketed, but the demand increased very, very much for training. One is the well-being. Anything from time management to stress management to finding work-life balance when there is none in these times, to setting up your remote workplace, to tips on looking good on a web camera, because some people hate when they see themselves, and like in Zoom you have to see yourself pretty much all the time, so on. To tips on staying productive in online meetings, like anything that makes your life a little bit easier, not your job easier, but like really your life easier. Somehow those courses, well, for obvious reasons, they've not been very like on the top of the list before, but now the demand is increasing. If you're planning, plan a little bit for those things as well. If you don't have them, just do a little bit of stock taking of how you're addressing your employees, not as people who perform tasks, but actually people who are people, and they suffer, they get stressed, they get bored, they get angry, they're people. So if you're not addressing this in your L&D curriculum, look at that. And another topic is security. People have moved home. They have moved to very random computers sometimes. I've seen people participating in meetings in cafes, on treadmills. Every time I'm in a gym, there's like 2 or 3 meetings, C-level meetings, I think, going on around me. Sometimes a guy will be bench pressing and there's a computer next to him, and I can see that there is a Microsoft Teams meeting going on. So, people do that from different places on different connections. People have moved to people stopped authenticating each other. Like you get a call from someone, like let me tell you the story. I just came from Amsterdam 2 weeks ago. My isolation is almost ended, as you can see. And I received a call on Friday night from just a random mobile number. And the guy said, like, are you, like, this is the police, are you home right now? And I said, no, I'm not home. And they're like, are you going to be? And I said, no, I'm actually, I'm supposed to be self-isolating there. I know, probably at my address. And they said, like, what's the address? And I said, this is my address. And they said, yes, okay, and you're not there? And I said, no, I'm not. I'm actually jogging on the beach, and I can do that. In Latvia, you can self-isolate and actually go outside. You just can't approach people. So I was running on a seashore. And they said, okay, but yeah, keep in mind that you have to wear a mask when you're outside, and don't approach people, and thank you. And that's it. And I said, well, okay, no problem. I know my rights. And that's it. And then I hung up, and it occurred to me that someone called me and found out where I live, if I'm there, and when I'm going to be back, and for how long I'm not going to be back. And I just trusted them, because, it's a call. Like, if someone said, okay, we're from a bank, and if you're using Latvian online banking system, those huge banners which say that the amount of fraud has increased, and they don't put those banners because everything's fine. Unless something is really bad, they will try not to alert you. So the security risks have increased greatly, and even the smart techie guys, like, I will fall for that. Like, those were the police that I know, by the way. I have a security camera, and I saw, like, the car drive like a police car who checked on me. But it might as easily been someone else. And I consider myself like smart guy who takes care of his parents and asks them not to buy stuff online from scammers and so on. So yeah, like, take a look at how people are trained for security. It hasn't been just a token training for them to like flip through a few slides and you get the check mark that everyone's trained and compliant. Or maybe you need to invest a little bit more effort in that. It's like, the situation is really, according to every report, from Norton Security to Kaspersky Lab to, like, you see those banners and you get those calls sometimes. Take a very careful look at what's happening with your security. All right, so maybe Raivis can talk a little bit about that, but we're approaching the end of things, and that's probably the last thing that we wanted to touch upon. How we're not using blended anymore, and we're moving on to hybrid. It's a huge buzzword right now if you go to vendors' websites, or especially to consultancy and advisory and learning websites. We'll try to onboard you in a couple of minutes. Right?
So basically, I will use a very, very simple example that will demonstrate it. So here at INTEA, we have a very good gym in the same building as us, and a lot of our colleagues go there, including, and they are probably a very good and simple example how they moved from face-to-face to hybrid. So what they did when they understood that people cannot go to the gym because it was closed due to COVID, so basically they had a face-to-face training, right? So they did two things. They first of all started to do that over Zoom, surprise, surprise, as everyone else. The other thing is that they started to collect those best Zoom sessions into a library and provide it to their gym goers, and now they are back into the some kind of a new normal where you can go to the gym and participate in the training sessions there, but they have not removed that possibility to join online, not going to the gym, and also to use the library. So basically, they created a hybrid. Meaning that you can get the same content, you can get to the same training in a couple of different ways. And this is what we see right now also in the corporate learning, that if before, it was a blend. So you go to a face-to-face training, and then you do some interactive training, then you do a test. So you have a learning program where each piece of content had only one channel, which was used to deliver it. Then hybrid means that you deliver the same thing in a couple of different ways, and the learner can choose how to use it. Another example, I was absolutely stricken by that. When I talked to a colleague of mine, Carlos, and Carlos, he's about to get PhD in anthropology at some point in the future, and he told me, you know what, that he's using this double speed in YouTube to watch videos. So for him, he doesn't have a lot of time, so he cannot participate in a, I don't know, Zoom lecture for 1 hour or 2 hours. But what he does, he watches those lectures in YouTube as recording, but he puts the speed of talking, he puts this double speed, and then he listens to it, and then he stops at those points that he really needs. You see, so there's kind of new behaviors appearing because there's a lot of pressure, and learners try to find ways how to navigate, and you have to cater for it. You have to offer them those possibilities.
But it's actually interesting. So pretty much every conference, and there has been like abundance of conferences I've participated in, every online conference has like every 5 minutes someone asks, are we recording that? Will there be a recording available? And by the way, we are recording. The recording will be available. But when you say that, people disengage. They're like, okay, I'll watch that later, and I will be able to skip to parts that I'm interested in, and so on. And on one hand, you want to cater to the people and say that, yeah, of course, if it saves you time, let's do that, and so on. On the other hand, you are taking something important away. So I see how people increasingly are doing online sessions which are not, well, they might be recorded technically, but it's not shared with everyone. It's just, unless something bad happens, or someone cuts out, and then you can like rewatch and so on. But generally, they say, okay, you have to be present, you have to participate. This whole experience has been designed for you to take part in, and no, you can't do that later, right? So it's like in school. Yeah, sometimes you can read the book about it, but sometimes the professor wants you to be there and discuss that, and maybe read it together, and that's a different experience, and so on. It can be a terrible experience as well when the professor just reads the book to you and you're like, oh my God. But we're not talking about good training versus bad training. What we're talking here is that sometimes people will try to optimize, and since they optimize on the wrong things, they optimize on their time and effort, whereas they should optimize on the quality of learning. They need you to push them in the right direction, right? It's just human nature. They will try to do that, just like with every e-learning or other learning activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you.
Like, don't just follow their lead automatically.
No, of course, you are absolutely right. And on this final note, I would like to say that there are two things to be aware of. One big problem, we see that a lot of lecturers, a lot of people who are very good in training face-to-face, and keeping that engagement you were talking about. But a lot of them need training to do that online. A lot of trainers need to be trained to do that over Zoom, because what happens is that very often you understand that this Zoom training, or could have been an email, or could have been something I can read. I don't need the person reading me from slides, for example. They can give me their experience.
Yeah, like I said, the conversion requires both the conversion of program, of the content, especially the activities, And also the trainers, not everyone speaks the same in front of the audience and in front of camera. Some people get shy when they don't have the audience. We've experienced this many times. We've recorded a ton of video lectures for different purposes. And, sometimes people who are like sales trainers and, who do great workshops, you put them in front of a camera, they can't, string two words together, and they try to read from a paper and it looks terrible. So we have a question in chat for you, Raivis, actually. Have you experienced how to deal with 50% participating person online and 50% at present, so the split audience? My own experience is that this is the hardest way to do anything, because it requires you to cater to both very different worlds, and try to avoid that. It does not save you anything. So if you understand that half of your audience will be online, just say that everyone will be online, unless they've bought the tickets and you don't want to give the money back. Try and move that into, obviously if you can't move that into the room, face-to-face room, move them all online and it will be easier, but that's a hard task. What I found is that actually sometimes it makes sense to simulate like face-to-face participation even for an online session. So if you have a person who is giving a lecture, just take a couple more people, put them on the camera, and let that person give the lecture to those two, maybe one, maybe two, maybe three people in the frame, and that will make everyone else watching this feel like a co-participant in that room. It will put the trainer at ease and into a familiar mode, and it will look better, because some people just can't do it when they are in an empty room. There's just an operator looking very bored behind the camera, and you have to talk to a black hole in front of you, or a little red dot. So that might work, but if you're in that split, try to move that split either way, and probably we're talking moving it to online.
I agree with you, Sergey. It never works. You have to be really skilled to do that, because as you said, to achieve the same learning outcome, you have to use a bit different methodology if you are doing it online in the Zoom meeting, or you're doing it in the room. And what happens, you're trying to find this middle way, and it's neither nor. So I would say if your resources allow, have two separate sessions. Have one, make them shorter.
I would say like, it will even take less resources. You can produce face-to-face classroom that is actually fun and engaging to watch online as well, but you will need high production values. You will need people trained, you will need a very thought out program, you will need multiple cameras, you will need ways to transmit participation of people in the room into the online environment. So you'll need multiple microphones, you will need a crew that will monitor this whole thing. And if you just put the lecturer on a microphone on a microphone on Zoom, then it's hard. But if you're required to do that, well, maybe let's talk. We might be able to actually dive into this situation with you and come up with ways how to do that. But if you just put a microphone on the lecture when the person is teaching a class, and let some other people listen in, that will not be a very good experience for those online people. So if you want that to be a good experience, then you will need to invest a little bit more effort, and also think about that ahead of time. But yeah, we're happy to help. I think we can take this offline and start wrapping up. We're 5 past. In terms of wrapping up, I want to advertise our next breakfast. If I understand correctly from Oksana, we're doing this in 4 weeks from now. And we will be talking about learning audit. So how do you take stock of what you have and what works and what doesn't? How do you define measures for understanding what's useful and what isn't, and how do you plan for creating of new content, replacing content, revisiting content all the time? How do you introduce KPIs and measures for learner satisfaction, and so on and so on and so on. So all things. And why, just a quick explanation why, is because we've been contacted in these times by multiple companies who said we thought we had e-learning, and then we suddenly found out that we actually don't. Like that, the fact that we had LMS and we had courses and we had vendors did not help us in the very least in moving online and like really using online learning for serious and critical tasks sometimes. So how do you know if you have e-learning or not, and where do you stack up against others? That will be the topic of our next breakfast in 4 weeks. RSVP, mark the date, save the dates, mark your calendars, and we hope that today has been useful. Let us know, say thanks in chat, wave your hand on camera. We're very happy to be back on air, and I'm very happy to see you, Raivis, as well. You look great.
You too, thank you. Yeah, we are definitely happy to be back, and this was an introductory session with some reflections and some ideas. And of course, as always, I urge you to throw on us things that you are interested in, and we'll try and put it into our breakfast curriculum. Very often you come up with very nice and interesting topics, and we're here for you. So don't hesitate, let us know. And yeah, we'll be informing you about the upcoming events. Yes, as Sergey said, the next one is most probably on the learning audit. And we'll talk about, well, does it work or doesn't it work? I mean, especially now in this new situation, I mean, even those systems that used to work really well have to be revisited. So let's take a look at how to do that.
Yeah. Thanks, and have a great weekend. Have the great rest of the week, and the recording will be available if you need that, or if you want to continue talking to us about anything. We're happy to help. Follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. We now have a YouTube channel, but it's actually empty right now. Great to see everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.